At first glance, the small suburban community of Maplewood Lane looked like something out of a dream. Perfectly trimmed lawns, cheerful mailboxes, and neighbors who waved as they walked their dogs. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's names, or at least thought they did. But beneath the calm surface of this American suburb, something dark was quietly brewing. The residents of Maplewood Lane lived in a bubble of comfort and routine. They shared morning coffee over fences, held summer cookouts, and gathered for block parties every year. It was the sort of place people moved to in search of peace, far away from the chaos of the city. But as it turns out, evil doesn't need dark alleys or shadowy figures to exist. Sometimes, it wears a friendly smile and lives right next door. Among the many homes that lined the quiet street was that of the Harris family: Mark, his wife Lisa, and their 2 young kids. They were well-liked, always appearing happy and helpful. Mark was known for lending a hand with repairs and yard work, while Lisa often organized neighborhood charity events. To everyone around them, they were the model family. But in February of that year, everything changed. One cold morning, neighbors noticed something strange. The Harris house was unusually quiet. The lights that usually flickered on at dawn stayed dark. Their car hadn't moved from the driveway. And by noon, when no one had seen or heard from them, a concerned neighbor called the police to do a welfare check. When officers arrived, they found the front door unlocked. What they discovered inside shattered the illusion of safety that Maplewood Lane had enjoyed for decades. The Harris family was gone. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry, just silence and the faint smell of cleaning chemicals. At first, investigators suspected they had left town unexpectedly, maybe a family emergency or a sudden trip. But then came the blood. Small traces found near the kitchen and leading toward the garage. It wasn't enough to indicate an accident. It was enough to suggest something violent. As police cordoned off the property and began their search, neighbors gathered on the sidewalks, whispering in disbelief. How could something like this happen here, in their peaceful, tight-knit community? The very thought sent chills through the quiet streets. Days later, the truth would begin to emerge. What police uncovered would reveal a horrifying betrayal, hidden beneath years of suburban perfection. The investigation into the Harris family's disappearance would soon lead detectives to a shocking suspect, one that would make everyone on Maplewood Lane question how well they really knew the people living just a few steps away. In the days following the Harris family's disappearance, Maplewood Lane transformed from a peaceful community into a crime scene swarming with police and media vans. Yellow tape fluttered in the cold wind, sealing off the Harris home as investigators worked tirelessly to piece together what had happened. Every neighbor was questioned, and every routine was scrutinized. Detectives began canvassing the area, going door to door. Among those interviewed was Tom Weaver, a 42-year-old mechanic who lived 2 houses down from the Harris family. Tom had always been the kind of neighbor everyone trusted. Quiet, dependable, and willing to lend a helping hand. He had even been close with Mark Harris, often seen chatting in driveways or fixing cars together on weekends. When detectives first spoke to Tom, he appeared genuinely concerned. He told them he'd seen the Harris family just 2 nights before they vanished. Mark mentioned they were planning a trip soon, Tom said calmly, sipping coffee on his porch. Maybe they just left early. His demeanor was casual, almost reassuring. But something about his tone struck one of the officers as off. Too composed, too detached for someone talking about missing neighbors he supposedly cared about. Inside the Harris home, forensic investigators began uncovering unsettling evidence. A shattered picture frame lay hidden beneath a couch cushion. Small blood droplets were discovered near the back door, the same area leading toward the garage. And when detectives reviewed surveillance footage from neighborhood security cameras, they noticed something peculiar. At 2:17 a.m. on the night the Harris family vanished, a dark-colored pickup truck was seen leaving the driveway. When police traced the vehicle registration, it led straight to Tom Weaver. Detectives returned to Tom's home the next day, this time with a search warrant. Inside his garage, they found cleaning supplies that matched the chemicals detected in the Harris residence. More disturbingly, a set of work boots tested positive for traces of blood. Blood later confirmed to belong to Mark Harris. The discovery sent shockwaves through Maplewood Lane. How could Tom, the friendly neighbor everyone trusted, be capable of something so horrific? Residents who once shared coffee and small talk with him now looked at his house with dread. As investigators pressed further, a motive began to emerge. It turned out Tom had been struggling financially for months. Mark, who owned a small construction business, had loaned him money that Tom had failed to repay. Neighbors remembered overhearing arguments between them, though no one thought much of it at the time. When confronted with the evidence, Tom's calm facade began to crack. He insisted he had nothing to do with the family's disappearance, that he'd only borrowed tools from Mark's garage that night. But his story didn't match the facts, and detectives weren't buying it. Behind his friendly smile and neighborly charm, Tom Weaver was hiding something far more sinister than anyone could imagine. And soon, the truth about what happened to the Harris family would come to light. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. As detectives closed in on Tom Weaver, the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood Lane was boiling with speculation. Everyone had a theory, but no one could believe that the man who fixed their cars and waved every morning could be at the center of a murder investigation. Investigators decided it was time to bring Tom back in for questioning. This time, not as a friendly neighbor, but as the prime suspect. Under the harsh lights of the interrogation room, Tom sat with his hands clasped tightly, sweat forming along his hairline. The detective leaned forward and pressed play on a screen, showing the grainy footage of a dark truck leaving the Harris driveway in the middle of the night. "That's your truck, isn't it, Tom?" the detective asked. Tom hesitated. "Looks like it, yeah. But that doesn't mean I did anything." But the evidence told a different story. Forensic results had come back. The blood on Tom's boots was a DNA match to Mark Harris. And even worse, fibers found in the back of Tom's pickup matched the carpet from the Harris living room. When confronted with these findings, Tom's composure began to crumble. His story shifted from denial to deflection. He claimed Mark had owed him money, that they'd argued and things got out of hand. But when detectives pressed for details, he stopped talking altogether. Back on Maplewood Lane, police continued their search. Following a faint chemical odor, a cadaver dog led investigators behind Tom's garage to a patch of disturbed soil covered with old wooden planks. The moment the shovel hit the ground, detectives knew what they had found. Buried beneath the surface were the bodies of Mark and Lisa Harris, along with their 2 young children. The family everyone thought had simply gone on vacation had been there all along, just steps from the man who had smiled in their faces every day. The crime scene was gruesome. Each family member had been killed in the same brutal manner, blunt force trauma, likely with a heavy tool. Detectives found a blood-stained hammer hidden behind Tom's tool chest, the weapon that would later become the key piece of evidence in his trial. The community was in shock. Candlelight vigils turned into outpourings of anger and disbelief. "He was just so normal," one neighbor told reporters. "You'd never think someone like that could do something so evil." But the motive, as it turned out, was chillingly simple: money and resentment. Tom's financial troubles had spiraled out of control, and after Mark demanded repayment, Tom snapped. In one night of rage, jealousy, and desperation, he destroyed an entire family. As Tom sat silently in the interrogation room, staring at the floor, detectives left him with one final question. "You called them your friends, Tom. So why did you kill them?" Tom didn't answer. He just looked up, his face pale and empty, and whispered, "You wouldn't understand." The news spread like wildfire. Local handyman charged with the murder of an entire family. For the tight-knit community of Maplewood Lane, the shock hadn't yet worn off. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, and neighbors whispered behind drawn curtains. Everyone wanted to know one thing: why? When Tom Weaver finally decided to talk, his confession sent chills through the room. Sitting across from detectives, his eyes were hollow, his tone disturbingly calm. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," he muttered. "Mark kept pushing me, he wouldn't stop." Detectives leaned in. Tom described how a simple argument over a small debt had turned violent. He claimed Mark had insulted him, called him a failure, and threatened to expose some shady side jobs Tom had been running for cash. That insult, Tom said, flipped a switch. "I grabbed the hammer," he confessed quietly. "I didn't mean to hit him that hard." But the confession didn't end there. As Tom described the scene, investigators realized something far more sinister. This wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. It was premeditated. Tom had brought garbage bags, cleaning supplies, and gloves with him that night. He'd even parked his truck around the corner to avoid being seen. When Lisa Harris walked in on the struggle, she became the next victim. The children were silenced soon after, perhaps because Tom feared they could identify him. As the interrogation continued, detectives began digging deeper into Tom's background, and what they found painted an even darker picture. Years earlier, Tom had been questioned in connection with the disappearance of a girlfriend in another state. She'd vanished without a trace, her case never solved. There were also reports of domestic violence, though charges were dropped. A retired police officer from his old hometown told investigators, "We always had our suspicions about him. There was something off about that guy, like he could flip in an instant." In court, prosecutors portrayed Tom Weaver as a man living a double life. A friendly, helpful neighbor on the surface, and a deeply disturbed killer underneath. The jury watched in silence as they played recordings of his confession. Some jurors wept when they heard how he buried the family in his backyard. The defense tried to argue temporary insanity, claiming Tom suffered from untreated mental illness and extreme financial stress. But the premeditated details, the planning, the lies, the effort to cover his tracks, painted a clear picture of control, not chaos. The trial lasted only 3 weeks. When the verdict was read, Tom stood motionless, guilty on all counts for murders. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away, one reporter shouted, "Tom, do you have anything to say to the Harris family?" He turned briefly and whispered, almost to himself, "They shouldn't have pushed me." That single sentence became the headline across the nation. A haunting reminder that even the most ordinary people can hide monstrous secrets. Even after Tom Weaver's conviction, Maplewood Lane was never the same. The cheerful greetings, the backyard barbecues, the trust, all of it vanished. The once lively neighborhood now felt like a ghost town, haunted not by spirits, but by memories. Lisa Harris's flower garden grew wild that summer, untouched and overgrown, a silent symbol of what the community had lost. Parents kept their children indoors. Porch lights that once flickered warmly now stayed on all night, not for decoration, but for protection. Local residents struggled to make sense of it. How could someone they'd waved to every morning, a man who fixed their fences and helped shovel their driveways, commit such unthinkable crimes? The phrase, "It could have been any of us," became a chilling reminder of how close danger had been all along. One neighbor, Mrs. Kavanaugh, later told reporters, "We thought we knew him. He'd sit on his porch and talk about his dog, his bills, his bad back. We never saw the darkness behind those eyes." For months, Maplewood Lane became the focus of national headlines. True crime shows and podcasts dissected every detail of the case, trying to answer the same haunting question. What turns an ordinary man into a killer? Psychologists weighed in, calling Tom Weaver a textbook example of hidden sociopathy. Someone who could mask his violent impulses under a calm, relatable exterior. To the world, he was a handyman trying to make ends meet. But behind closed doors, he nursed deep resentment, jealousy, and rage toward those who had what he didn't: stable families and success. The Harris family's relatives established a small foundation in their memory, the Harris Hope Fund, dedicated to supporting victims of domestic and community violence. Their message was clear: evil doesn't always come from the shadows. Sometimes it lives next door. Years later, when a new family finally moved into the Harris home, they were met with quiet kindness but lingering fear. Some residents moved away, unable to drive past the house without remembering the horror. Others stayed, determined not to let one man's darkness erase decades of community love. The police chief who oversaw the investigation summed it up best. "We all like to think we'd spot a killer. The truth is, they often look just like us, smile like us, live right beside us. As the sun set over Maplewood Lane years after the tragedy, the street looked peaceful again. Kids played, dogs barked, and new faces filled the homes. Yet for those who remembered, that peace would always feel fragile. A reminder that evil can wear a friendly face, and that safety, no matter how familiar, can sometimes be an illusion.